The wooden crate slipped from Tessa Langford's trembling hands and crashed onto the dusty street, spilling spools of thread in every direction as the landlord's men carried the last of her meager belongings out of the boarding house she had called home for 3 years. Her 2 children stood beside her in the blazing Arizona sun, 5-year-old Samuel clinging to her skirts, while 8-year-old Margaret tried to appear brave, despite the tears threatening to spill down her sun-browned cheeks. It was August of 1882, and Tessa had just become one more widow left behind by the unforgiving West, her husband John having died 6 months prior in a mining accident that left her with nothing but debts and hungry mouths to feed. "Mama, where will we sleep tonight?" Samuel's small voice cut through the fog of despair threatening to overwhelm her. Tessa knelt beside him, smoothing back his dark hair so like his father's, and forced a smile she did not feel. "We will find something, my darling. God provides for his own." The words felt hollow even as she spoke them, but she refused to let her children see her break. She had been raised stronger than that, even if right now she felt like nothing more than dust blowing in the hot Arizona wind. Watsonville was not a large town, barely more than a dusty collection of buildings along the Territorial Road. But it had been growing slowly, with the nearby copper mines bringing workers and their families seeking fortune, or at least steady wages. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a small church, the boarding house from which she had just been evicted, and a handful of other establishments. Beyond that stretched endless desert scrub, and the distant purple mountains that seemed to mock her with their unchanging permanence while her whole world crumbled. Tessa gathered what she could carry, instructing Margaret to take the smaller bundle while she hefted Samuel onto her hip along with a canvas bag containing her sewing supplies, the one thing she had fought tooth and nail to keep when the creditors came calling. Her skill with a needle had kept them fed these past months, taking in mending and making simple garments for the miners' wives, but it had not been enough to cover the room and board she owed. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house proprietor, had been patient longer than most would have been. But patience did not pay bills. The sun beat down mercilessly as Tessa led her children down the wooden sidewalk, trying to formulate some sort of plan. Her pride screamed against the idea of begging at the church, but pride would not shelter her children tonight. She was halfway to Reverend Mitchell's small whitewashed building when she heard boots on the wooden planks behind her. "Mrs. Langford, hold on just a moment." She turned to find Garrett Quinn standing there, hat in his hands, his weathered face creased with concern. She knew him by sight, a rancher who came into town every few weeks for supplies, always polite and soft-spoken despite his imposing size. He stood well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders built from years of hard work, his sun-streaked brown hair touching his collar, and green eyes that seemed kind despite the hardness that frontier life carved into most men. She guessed him to be perhaps 30, though the sun aged everyone out here faster than it should. "Mr. Quinn." She shifted Samuel's weight on her hip, suddenly acutely aware of how desperate she must look with all her worldly possessions bundled in her arms and dust coating her worn dress. "I am afraid I cannot stop for long. I need to find accommodation for my children. I heard what happened. Mrs. Henderson mentioned it at the general store this morning." He twisted his hat in his hands, clearly uncomfortable but determined to speak anyway. "I know this might sound forward, and I mean no disrespect to your late husband's memory, but I have a proposition that might benefit us both." Tessa's spine stiffened instinctively. She had heard propositions before in the past months, offers that made her skin crawl and her hands itch to slap the smiles off the faces of men who thought a widow was fair game for their base desires. "Mr. Quinn, I am not that sort of woman. No, madam, I know that. I apologize. I am making a mess of this. He took a breath and met her eyes directly. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, just a small spread with cattle and horses. The house is solid, built it myself with good timber, but it is rough living. My wife died 3 years back giving birth to our daughter, who died with her, and I have been barely keeping things together since. The house needs a woman's touch, Mrs. Langford, and I am in desperate need of help. I am offering you and your children a place to stay in exchange for keeping house and maybe doing some sewing work. Separate rooms, entirely respectable. I would pay you a wage on top of room and board. Tessa stared at him, searching his face for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. Samuel was growing heavy in her arms, and Margaret had set down her bundle, exhaustion evident in every line of her small body. What choice did she really have? The church might offer them a night or two, but then what? She could not sew if she had no place to work, and she could not feed her children on air and prayers alone. Separate rooms, she repeated slowly. And a wage. Yes, madam, I am not a rich man, but I can offer fair pay. You would have your own space, and the children would be safe and fed. I know it is not ideal, a widow woman coming to live at a bachelor's ranch, but I give you my word as a Christian man that I will treat you with nothing but respect. Margaret tugged on her skirt. Mama, I am so tired. The decision made itself. Tessa straightened her shoulders and met Garrett Quinn's steady gaze. Very well, Mr. Quinn. We accept your offer on a trial basis, but I warn you, if you prove to be anything other than the gentleman you claim, I will take my children and leave immediately, regardless of the consequences. I would expect nothing less, madam. Let me help you with those bundles. He reached for the canvas bag, and she let him take it, too exhausted to protest further. I have my wagon just outside the general store. We can load everything up and head out before the day gets any hotter. As they walked together toward the store, Tessa felt the eyes of the townspeople on her, and knew that tongues would be wagging by nightfall. A widow woman moving out to a bachelor's ranch, children or no children, would be scandalous enough to fuel gossip for weeks. But her children's needs outweighed her concern for her reputation, and she held her head high as she followed Garrett Quinn to his wagon. The wagon was old but sturdy, pulled by 2 patient-looking horses that flicked their ears at flies. Garrett loaded her belongings with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, then helped Margaret climb into the back before reaching for Samuel. The boy went to him without fear, and Tessa felt something tight in her chest ease slightly. Children had instincts about people, and Samuel had been wary of strangers since his father's death. Garrett offered his hand to help her onto the wagon seat, and she took it, feeling the calluses that marked a working man's palm. He climbed up beside her and took up the reins with practiced ease, clucking softly to the horses. They moved forward at a steady walk, leaving Watsonville behind in a small cloud of dust. For several minutes, they rode in silence. The landscape stretched out around them, harsh and beautiful in the way of desert country. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the impossibly blue sky, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. Margaret and Samuel had settled in the wagon bed, Margaret already nodding off despite the jostling of the wheels over the rutted road. "How long have you been ranching out here, Mr. Quinn?" Tessa finally asked, needing to break the awkward silence. "Call me Garrett, please." "I have been on this land about 8 years now. Came out from Missouri after the war. I was just a boy during the fighting, too young to enlist, but old enough to see what it did to my older brothers. After my parents passed, there was nothing holding me back east, so I headed west like so many others looking for a fresh start. And you found it here in Arizona territory. She could not keep the slight skepticism from her voice. This land seemed designed to break people, not offer them new beginnings. I found something. Not sure if it is what I was looking for, but it is mine. Built it with my own 2 hands, carved it out of nothing. There is satisfaction in that, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard, maybe. He glanced at her sideways. What about you? You are not originally from these parts, I would wager. Your accent sounds East Coast. Pennsylvania originally. Philadelphia. My father was a tailor, and he taught me the trade before he died. I met John at a church social, and he had such dreams about the West, about making our fortune in the mines. I followed him because I loved him and believed in those dreams. She looked down at her work-roughened hands, so different from the soft hands she had once possessed. The West has a way of grinding dreams to dust, I have learned. Sometimes. But sometimes dreams just change shape into something different than what you imagined. Not worse, just different. He guided the horses around a particularly deep rut. I am sorry about your husband. Mining is dangerous work. Thank you. He was a good man, just unlucky. The foreman said the support timber was rotten, gave way without warning. John died trying to help another man get out. That was like him, always thinking of others before himself. Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard. She had shed enough tears already. Her children needed her to be strong now. They fell back into silence, but it felt more comfortable this time, less awkward. The sun climbed higher, and Tessa was grateful when Garrett pulled a canteen from beneath the seat and offered it to her. The water was warm but welcome, and she made sure the children drank their fill when he passed it back to them. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Garrett guided the horses off the main road onto a narrower track that wound between low hills covered in scrub and occasional mesquite trees. They crested a rise, and Tessa got her first glimpse of the Quinn ranch. It was modest but more substantial than she had expected. The house was a solid structure of timber and stone, single-story but sprawling, with a covered porch running along the front. A barn stood behind it, painted red like so many back east, though the paint was faded and peeling. There were several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance she could see cattle dotting the landscape. Everything looked worn but functional, the mark of a man who worked hard but alone. "It is not much," Garrett said, and she heard uncertainty in his voice for the first time, as if her opinion suddenly mattered to him. "But the house is solid. I built it to last, thinking I would fill it with family." He stopped abruptly, and she knew he was thinking of his wife and the daughter who never took her first breath. "It looks sturdy," Tessa said gently. "That is more than many can say." He nodded and guided the horses toward the house. As they drew closer, Tessa could see that the porch was cluttered with items that should have been stored elsewhere. Tools, saddle gear, even what looked like a bridle hanging from a nail by the door. The windows were dusty, and she caught glimpses of the interior through the wavy glass that suggested a similar state of benign neglect. Garrett pulled the horses to a stop and set the brake before climbing down. He helped her down first, then the children, before beginning to unload her belongings. Tessa stood in the yard for a moment, taking it all in. 3 chickens scratched in the dirt near the barn, and a lean yellow dog emerged from the shade of the porch, tail wagging cautiously. "That is Rufus. He is friendly, just old. Mostly he sleeps these days." Garrett set down the last bundle and pulled keys from his pocket. "Come on, let me show you inside." The front door opened directly into a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the furniture, though simple, was well made. What struck Tessa most forcefully was how obviously a woman's hand had been absent from this place for years. Dishes were piled in a dry sink. Dust covered every surface, and the whole place had the stale smell of a space that had been lived in but not truly maintained. Clothes were draped over chairs. A stack of newspapers had toppled across a table, and she spotted what looked like a half-repaired piece of tack on the kitchen table itself. Garrett had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know it is a mess. I have been meaning to clean things up, but there never seems to be enough time. Between the cattle and the horses and keeping everything running, housework falls to the bottom of the list." "I can see that," Tessa said, but her tone was not unkind. She was already mentally cataloging what needed to be done, her fingers itching to set things right. A home should be a sanctuary, not just a place to collapse at the end of a long day. "Where would our rooms be, this way?" He led them down a short hallway. This was going to be the nursery. He pushed open a door to reveal a small room with a single window. It was empty except for a half-finished cradle in the corner, covered with dust. "I know it is not much, but there is space for 2 small beds. For you, I thought the main bedroom. I have been sleeping out in the barn most nights anyway, so you would have your privacy." Tessa frowned. "Mr. Quinn, I cannot take your bed. That is not right." "Garrett, and yes, you can. You are a lady and you have children to think about." "I am comfortable enough in the barn, especially in summer. Winter might be different, but we will figure something out when the time comes. Besides, I am up before dawn most mornings anyway. Makes more sense for me to be closer to the animals." Before she could protest further, Margaret spoke up. "Mama, can Samuel and I really have our own room? We never had our own room before." The wonder in her voice made Tessa's heart ache. Her children had known nothing but crowded boarding houses, and before that, a tiny miner's shack that barely kept out the cold. "Yes, sweetheart. It seems we will have our own space here." She looked at Garrett, seeing him in a new light. He was offering them not just shelter but dignity, space to breathe and be a family. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I mean, Garrett, this is very generous. It is nothing you will not earn, I assure you. As you can see, this place desperately needs someone who knows how to make it a home instead of just a place to sleep." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking younger and more uncertain. "I should show you the rest, then let you settle in. I imagine you and the children are exhausted." He showed her the rest of the house quickly. Besides the main room and the 2 bedrooms down the short hall, there was a third room he used as an office of sorts, cluttered with ranch records and supplies. The main bedroom was surprisingly neat, the bed made with military precision though the quilt was faded and worn. A dresser and washstand completed the furnishings, and another door led to a small back porch. There is a well just outside with good water, and the privy is behind the house. Not fancy but functional. I can bring in a tub for bathing from the barn, though it will need a good scrubbing first." He paused in the doorway. "I usually eat in town or make do with simple fare. I am afraid I am not much of a cook. I was hoping that might be part of the arrangement if you are willing. Of course, a good meal is part of keeping a proper house." Tessa set down her bag and looked around the room that would be hers. It was larger than anywhere she had slept since leaving Philadelphia, and the bed looked solid and comfortable. "When would you like me to start? No rush today. Get settled. Let the children rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about routines and such. I need to check on the cattle anyway. Make sure none have strayed too far. There is some dried beef and bread in the pantry if you are hungry, and the chickens usually lay enough eggs for breakfast." He left then, and Tessa heard him speaking softly to the children, asking Samuel about whether he liked horses and telling Margaret about the new calf that had been born just last week. Then the front door closed, and she was alone in the sudden silence. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, letting herself have just one moment of weakness. She had been so frightened, so desperate when the landlord's men had put her things on the street. She had no family to turn to, no resources beyond her needle and thread. The possibility of ending up destitute or worse had loomed before her like a yawning chasm. And then Garrett Quinn had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to utter. A stranger offering kindness with no expectation of anything improper, just honest work for honest pay and a safe place for her children. It seemed too good to be true, and she knew she needed to remain cautious. But looking around this room, imagining her children sleeping safely down the hall, she felt the first stirring of something she had not experienced in months. Hope. She stood up and went to find her children. Margaret and Samuel were in their new room, Samuel already trying to climb into the cradle despite being far too big for it, while Margaret examined the empty space with serious eyes. "We will need to make beds for you both," Tessa said. "But for tonight, we can make pallets on the floor. Tomorrow we will see about getting proper furnishings." "I like it here, Mama," Samuel announced. "Mr. Garrett is nice. He said he would teach me to ride a horse. Did he now? Well, we will see about that. First, we need to prove we can be helpful here. This is a job, children, and we must do it well. Mr. Quinn is being very kind to us, and we must show him his kindness was not misplaced." "I can help clean," Margaret offered. "I am good at cleaning. Mrs. Henderson said so." "I know you are, sweetheart, and I will need your help. This house needs a lot of work." She looked around at the dusty room, the cobwebs in the corners, the windows that had not seen a proper washing in who knew how long. It was overwhelming, but it was also purposeful. She had work to do, a roof over her head, and a chance to build something stable for her children. They spent the rest of the afternoon settling in as best they could. Tessa found linens in a trunk in the main bedroom, musty from disuse but serviceable once aired out. She made up beds for the children on the floor of their room and put fresh sheets on the big bed in her room, trying not to think too hard about the fact that another woman had once slept there, had once shared this space with Garrett, had died hoping to bring new life into this house. She found the pantry and was relieved to see it was better stocked than she had feared. Dried beans, flour, cornmeal, coffee, sugar, salt, and various preserved goods lined the shelves. In the cold cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the pantry floor, she found potatoes, onions, and even some apples starting to wrinkle but still edible. With these supplies and the eggs from the chickens, she could make proper meals. That evening she made a simple supper of fried eggs, fried potatoes with onions, and bread toasted in a skillet. It was not fancy, but it was hot and filling, and her children ate with enthusiasm. They were just finishing when Garrett returned, dust-covered and weary-looking. "Something smells good," he said from the doorway, pulling off his hat. "I have not smelled proper cooking in this house in a long time. It is nothing special, but there is plenty if you are hungry. Let me fix you a plate." Tessa stood and moved to the stove, dishing up food before he could protest. She set the plate on the table, noting the surprise in his eyes that she had cleared a space, and even laid out a proper place setting with utensils and a napkin. "You did not have to do all this today," he said, but he sat down with obvious relief. "I told you to rest. Idle hands make for a troubled mind. Besides, it is what I am here for." She poured him coffee from the pot she had made and set it beside his plate. "The children and I are settled enough for now. Tomorrow I will start on a proper cleaning, and I need to know what you prefer for meals. What time do you typically eat breakfast?" "Before dawn, usually. I am up at 4:30 or 5 to tend the animals and check the property before the heat of the day. Then I will have breakfast ready by 5. What about dinner?" "Evening, after the work is done. Usually around 7 or so, depending on what needs doing." He took a bite of the potatoes and closed his eyes briefly. "This is good, really good. I did not realize how much I had been living on barely edible food until right now. A man needs proper nourishment to work hard. My father always said a good meal was an investment in tomorrow's labor." She settled back into her chair, watching him eat. There was something strangely intimate about sitting at a table with this man she barely knew, her children already asleep down the hall, the lamp light casting soft shadows around the kitchen. It felt almost like they were a family, though nothing could be further from the truth. Garrett must have felt the awkwardness too, because he cleared his throat and said, "I should tell you a bit about the ranch, what I am working toward here. I run about 200 head of cattle, mostly for beef. Every few months I drive some to market in Tucson or sell to the army if they are buying. The horses are my real interest, though. I breed working horses, good solid animals that can handle the terrain and the heat. There is always a market for a well-trained horse." "It sounds like you have built something substantial here." Tessa sipped her own coffee, grateful for the bitter warmth. "Do you manage all of this alone?" "I have a hand who comes by a few times a week, Manuel Garcia. Good man, knows cattle. His family has a small place a few miles south. But mostly, yes, it is just me. That is part of why everything has gotten so run down. There are only so many hours in a day." He finished his meal and sat back with a satisfied sigh. "I know I already said it, but thank you for the meal and for agreeing to come here. I know it must have been a hard decision." "It was the only decision," Tessa said honestly. "You offered my children safety when we had none. I am grateful, Mr. Quinn, truly." "Garrett," he corrected gently. "If we are going to be sharing a house, even respectably, we should probably use Christian names. And I should call you Tessa if that is all right." She nodded slowly. "That would be acceptable." They talked a while longer, working out the practical details of their arrangement. He would pay her $5 a week in addition to room and board, a fair wage for a housekeeper in these parts. She would handle all cooking, cleaning, and laundry, and was free to take in sewing work as she had time and inclination. He asked if she needed anything from town, offered to take her in the wagon the next week so she could purchase any supplies she required. Finally, he stood and gathered his hat. "I will let you get some rest. It has been a long day for you and the children. I will be in the barn if you need anything, though I doubt you will." "Garrett," she stopped him at the door. "Thank you again for being a decent man in a world that does not always reward decency. My children are everything to me, and you have given them back their security. I will not forget that." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his green eyes. "You are welcome, Tessa. Sleep well." After he left, Tessa cleaned up from supper, washing the dishes and putting them away in the cupboard. She checked on the children and found them both sound asleep, despite the hardness of their makeshift beds. She would remedy that soon, would find or make something better for them. Finally, she retired to her own room and changed into her nightgown in the darkness, too exhausted to even light a lamp. She slipped between the sheets, and despite her tiredness, sleep did not come immediately. Instead, she lay there thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. This morning, she had been desperate and homeless. Tonight she lay in a comfortable bed in a house that smelled of dust and disuse, but also of possibility. And somewhere out in the barn was a man who had shown her kindness when he could have simply ridden past, a man who looked at her children with gentleness rather than seeing them as burdens. She knew she needed to be careful. Her heart was still tender from John's death, and gratitude could be mistaken for deeper feelings if she was not cautious. But as she finally drifted toward sleep, she could not deny that Garrett Quinn intrigued her. There was a loneliness in him that matched her own, a sense of someone who had survived loss and kept going because there was no other choice. Perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, perhaps they could help each other heal while maintaining proper boundaries. Perhaps this arrangement could be exactly what they both needed, nothing more and nothing less. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Tessa with its comfort. She rose before dawn each morning to prepare breakfast, learning Garrett's preferences through observation and quiet questions. He liked his coffee strong and black, his eggs fried with crispy edges, and was grateful for anything that did not come from a tin or require only boiling water. She attacked the house with determined energy, cleaning one room at a time with Margaret's eager help, while Samuel played in the yard under Rufus's watchful eye. The amount of accumulated dirt and neglect was staggering, but Tessa found satisfaction in seeing surfaces emerge clean and gleaming under her cloth. She washed windows until they sparkled, beat rugs until no more dust emerged, and scrubbed floors on her hands and knees until her back ached. Garrett noticed. He did not say much, but she caught him pausing in doorways, looking around as if seeing the house fresh. He started leaving his boots on the porch instead of tracking dirt through the house. He began hanging his coat on the pegs she had installed by the door instead of draping it over furniture. Small changes, but they told her he appreciated what she was doing. In the evenings after supper, a pattern emerged. Garrett would sit at the now clear kitchen table working on his account books or mending tack while Tessa sewed by lamplight, and the children played quietly before bed. Sometimes they talked, stilted conversations at first that grew easier with familiarity. He told her about the ranch, about his hopes to expand the horse breeding operation. She told him about Philadelphia, about her father's tailor shop and the life she had left behind. They did not speak of deeper things at first, not of his dead wife or her dead husband, not of the losses that had carved hollow places in both their hearts. Those topics felt too intimate for their carefully maintained boundaries. But despite the propriety they both insisted upon, Tessa found herself becoming increasingly aware of Garrett as a man rather than simply her employer. The way his shoulders strained against his shirt when he lifted heavy objects, the rare smile that transformed his weathered face when Samuel said something amusing, the gentleness in his calloused hands when he helped Margaret onto one of the gentler horses, teaching her to sit properly in the saddle. She scolded herself for such thoughts. She was here to work, to provide for her children, not to develop feelings for her employer. That way lay danger and complication. She was still in mourning, still wore the black dress that marked her as a widow, though it was faded and mended in several places now. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Garrett drove them all into Watsonville for supplies. Tessa had prepared a list of things she needed for the house, and Garrett had his own list of ranch necessities. Margaret and Samuel were beside themselves with excitement at the prospect of going to town, their first trip since arriving at the ranch. The journey was pleasant in the relative cool of the morning. Garrett had cleaned the wagon and laid down fresh blankets in the back for the children, a small courtesy that touched Tessa more than perhaps it should have. They sang songs as they drove, Samuel's piping voice leading them through half-remembered hymns and folk tunes. But Tessa's stomach tightened as they rolled into town. She knew what to expect, had been bracing for it since agreeing to Garrett's offer. Sure enough, as soon as they pulled up in front of the general store, she saw heads turning, saw Mrs. Henderson across the street pause in her sweeping to stare, saw 2 women she recognized from church put their heads together and whisper. Garrett helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady under her elbow. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "Small minds make for busy tongues. I am used to gossip, unfortunately, Being a widow brings its own share of speculation. She lifted her chin and walked into the store with Margaret and Samuel trailing behind her. Mr. Peterson, who ran the general store, greeted them with professional courtesy, though his eyes were curious. Tessa presented her list and began selecting what she needed while Garrett moved to the other side of the store for his own purchases. She was examining fabric for making new shirts for the children when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Mrs. Langford. "I did not expect to see you still in town. I heard you had found alternative accommodations." Tessa turned to find Mrs. Henderson standing there, her expression a mix of disapproval and curiosity. "Mrs. Henderson, yes, I have found a position as housekeeper at the Quinn Ranch." "I see. Living out there with Mr. Quinn, that must be quite an arrangement." The words were pleasant enough, but the tone was not. "It is a respectable employment situation, I assure you. Mr. Quinn needed household help, and I needed a position that would allow me to keep my children with me." "It suits us both." "I am sure it does." Mrs. Henderson's eyes flicked to where Garrett stood across the store, then back to Tessa. "Though I wonder what your poor late husband would think of such a situation." Tessa felt anger kindle in her chest, but before she could respond, Garrett appeared at her elbow. His voice was calm but carried an edge she had not heard before. "Mrs. Henderson, I wonder what your late husband would think about you turning out a widow woman and her children onto the street. Seems to me that caring for those less fortunate is what Christ called us to do, not gossiping about folks trying to survive." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red. "Well, I never. The nerve of some people." She swept toward the door, her skirt swishing with indignation. Tessa looked up at Garrett, surprised and oddly moved by his defense of her. "You did not have to do that. I am used to managing such people." "Maybe, but you should not have to. Not when you are working hard and doing nothing wrong." He picked up the bolt of fabric she had been examining. "Is this what you need?" "Yes, but it is expensive. Perhaps I can find something less costly." "Get what you need to make the children proper clothes, and get something for yourself while you are at it. You have been wearing the same 2 dresses since you arrived, and both are nearly worn through." When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "This is not charity. You work hard and you should have what you need. Besides, if folks are going to talk anyway, might as well give them something to really talk about." She could not help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "You are a stubborn man, Garrett Quinn." "So I have been told." He smiled back, and she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. They finished their shopping, Garrett insisting on paying for everything, including the extra fabric and notions Tessa picked out for new dresses. As they loaded the wagon, Reverend Mitchell approached, his weathered face kind beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Garrett, Mrs. Langford." "Good to see you both. And these must be your children, madam, fine-looking youngsters." He smiled at Margaret and Samuel, who regarded him shyly. "Reverend," Garrett acknowledged with a nod. "How are things at the church?" "Well enough, though we could always use more hands for the work of the Lord." He turned to Tessa. "I must say, Mrs. Langford, I was concerned when I heard about your situation, but it seems the Lord provides in mysterious ways. Garrett here is a good man, one of the most honest I have known. You could do worse for an employer." "Thank you, Reverend. He has been very kind to us." Tessa appreciated the implicit approval in the minister's words, knew that his public blessing of the arrangement would go some way toward silencing the worst of the gossip. "I hope we will see you all at services this Sunday. We have been missing you, Garrett. It has been some months since you have graced us with your presence." Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "I have been busy with the ranch, Reverend. You know how it is." "I do, but the good Lord rested on the seventh day, and so should we. Besides, community is important. We take care of our own." He tipped his hat to Tessa. "I will see you Sunday, then." After he left, Garrett was quiet as he finished securing the load in the wagon. Tessa settled the children in the back and climbed up to the seat, waiting. Finally, Garrett joined her and took up the reins, but he did not immediately start the horses moving. "I stopped going to church after Catherine died," he said abruptly. "Seemed like God and I were not on speaking terms for a while. Still not sure we are, to be honest. I understand. I felt the same when John died. Wondered what kind of God would take a good man and leave his family destitute." Tessa looked down at her hands. "But then I think about my children, about how we were taken care of just when things seemed darkest, and I wonder if maybe God works through people instead of miracles. Maybe you were the answer to my prayers, and I just did not recognize it at first." Garrett looked at her, really looked at her, and something passed between them that made Tessa's breath catch. Then he clucked to the horses and they started moving, leaving Watsonville behind once more. The journey back to the ranch was quieter, the children dozing in the afternoon heat. Tessa found herself studying Garrett's profile when she thought he was not paying attention, noticing details she had missed before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the strength in his jaw and the surprising length of his eyelashes. She was developing feelings for him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Somewhere between cleaning his house and cooking his meals and sitting across from him in the lamplight evening after evening, gratitude had transformed into something deeper, more dangerous. She cared about him, worried when he came home looking exhausted, felt a small thrill of pleasure when she could make him smile, found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day. It was too soon. John had been dead only 6 months. A proper mourning period was at least a year, often longer. What kind of woman was she to be having such thoughts about another man? And Garrett had given no indication that he saw her as anything other than his housekeeper. Yes, he was kind, but he was kind to everyone. It meant nothing. She needed to get control of herself, to remember her place and her purpose here. This was a job, nothing more. She could not risk complicating it with inappropriate feelings. Her children's security depended on her ability to maintain professional boundaries. But that night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant sounds of the ranch settling for sleep, she could not stop thinking about the way Garrett had defended her to Mrs. Henderson, the way he had insisted she buy fabric for herself, the way he had looked at her in the wagon when she mentioned prayers and answers. Sleep was a long time coming. As summer faded toward fall, the heat remained oppressive, but the quality of light changed, growing somehow richer and more golden in the late afternoons. Tessa had transformed the house from a bachelor's neglected dwelling into a proper home. Curtains she had sewn hung in the windows, bright calico prints that softened the harsh sunlight. The floors gleamed with regular washing and waxing. The furniture was polished and properly arranged. She had even planted a small kitchen garden in a patch of ground near the house, nursing vegetables from seed with careful watering. Garrett noticed and appreciated every change. He had taken to spending more time in the house in the evenings instead of retreating immediately to the barn. They had fallen into an easy companionship, talking about everything and nothing while she sewed and he worked on ranch business. Sometimes they played simple games with the children before bed, Margaret teaching Garrett to play jacks while Samuel insisted on climbing into his lap to hear stories. Tessa tried not to read too much into the way Samuel had bonded with Garrett, tried not to see the longing in her son's eyes when he watched the tall cowboy work with the horses. Samuel needed a father figure, she told herself. It was natural he would gravitate toward the only man in his daily life. It did not mean anything beyond that, but her own feelings continued to grow despite her best efforts to contain them. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance, wearing the new dresses she had made from the fabric Garrett had insisted on buying. She learned his favorite foods and made sure to prepare them regularly. She laughed at his dry humor and shared her own observations about ranch life, pleased when she could make him smile. One evening in late September, after the children had gone to bed, Garrett surprised her by producing a small wooden box from his office. "I found this when I was organizing some papers. It was Catherine's, and I think she would want you to have it." He set the box on the table between them. Tessa opened it carefully and found an assortment of sewing notions, buttons, ribbons, and lace, along with several spools of fine thread. "Garrett, I cannot take your wife's things. They have been sitting unused for 3 years. Catherine loved to sew, always had some project going. She would be happy knowing they were being used again instead of gathering dust." He paused, then added quietly, "I think she would be happy knowing the house is cared for again, that there are children's voices filling it. She wanted that so badly." "Tell me about her," Tessa said impulsively. "If it is not too painful. I feel like I am living in her shadow sometimes, sleeping in her bed, cooking in her kitchen. I would like to know who she was." Garrett was quiet for so long that Tessa thought she had overstepped, but then he began to speak, his voice low and remembering. "Catherine was from Ohio, a schoolteacher who came west with her brother and his family. We met at a church social much like you met your husband. She was small and blonde and had the kindest eyes I ever saw. She loved this land despite its harshness, loved the idea of building something permanent out here. We had 4 good years together before she got pregnant. She was so happy about the baby, had so many plans." His voice roughened. "But something went wrong. The midwife said the baby was turned around wrong, that there was nothing to be done. Catherine died trying to bring our daughter into the world, and the baby died with her. I buried them together in the plot up on the hill behind the house." Tessa reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, an impulsive gesture of comfort. "I am so sorry, Garrett. That is a terrible loss to bear. It was a dark time. I almost gave up the ranch, almost went back east or maybe headed to California. But in the end, this place was all I had left of the life we planned together. Leaving felt like betraying her memory." He turned his hand over, clasping hers. "I have been just existing for 3 years, Tessa, going through the motions of living without really living. And then you and your children showed up, and suddenly my house felt like a home again. I know this is meant to be a business arrangement, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable, but I need you to know what a difference you have made." Tessa's heart was pounding. His hand was warm and rough against hers, and she could not bring herself to pull away. "You have made a difference for us too. You saved us when we had nowhere to go. You gave my children security and gave me purpose again. I was drowning in grief and fear, and you threw me a lifeline." They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the table, and something fundamental shifted between them. The careful boundaries they had maintained were crumbling, and neither seemed inclined to rebuild them. "Tessa," Garrett said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I know it has only been a few months. I know you are still in mourning for your husband, and I would never want to be disrespectful to his memory. But I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with needing a housekeeper or even companionship. These feelings I have been developing, they are real and they are growing stronger every day. I think I am falling in love with you, and I needed to say it even if it is too soon and even if you cannot feel the same way." Tessa's breath caught. She should pull her hand away, should remind him of propriety and mourning periods and all the reasons this was impossible. But instead, she found herself saying, "It is too soon. I know it is too soon. John has been dead less than a year, and you lost Catherine only 3 years ago. By all rights, we should both still be deep in mourning. But Garrett, I cannot pretend I do not feel something for you too. I have tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it is just gratitude, but it is more than that. So much more. What do we do?" His green eyes searched hers. "I do not want to rush you or pressure you. Your friendship and presence in my life are too valuable to risk, but I also cannot pretend I do not want more." "I do not know," she admitted. "Maybe we just take things slowly. We do not have to announce anything or change how things are. We just acknowledge what is growing between us and see where it leads. I can do slow. I am a patient man." He squeezed her hand gently. "Though I have to tell you, having you under my roof and knowing I cannot court you properly is a special kind of torture." She laughed, feeling suddenly giddy despite the seriousness of the conversation. "Who says you cannot court me? Just because we live in the same house does not mean you cannot be a gentleman about it. Bring me wildflowers from the range. Ask me to walk with you in the evening. Talk to me about your dreams and ambitions. That is courting, is it not? I suppose it is at that." He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "All right then, Tessa Langford. Would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you, unconventional as our circumstances might be?" "I would be honored, Garrett Quinn." They sat there smiling at each other like fools until Tessa finally pulled her hand back, suddenly shy. "It is getting late. I should retire." "Of course." He stood when she did, ever the gentleman. "Sleep well, Tessa. You too, Garrett." She went to bed that night with her heart lighter than it had been in over a year. Yes, people would talk. Yes, some would say it was too soon or improper. But she was a grown woman who had survived loss and hardship, and if she had found something good in the midst of grief, she was going to embrace it. The next morning, she found a small bouquet of desert wildflowers in a tin cup on the kitchen table. She pressed one of the blooms in her Bible and put the rest in a glass of water on the windowsill where she could see them while she worked. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Tessa had experienced. With John, everything had been chaperoned and formal, stolen moments under the watchful eyes of her father and the church community. But here on the ranch, with children to care for and work to be done, their relationship developed in quiet domestic moments that felt both ordinary and precious. Garrett started sitting with her on the porch after supper, talking while the sun set in spectacular displays of orange and purple across the wide sky. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his dreams of expanding the ranch, about his hope of breeding a line of horses that would be renowned across the territory. She told him about Philadelphia, about the theater and music she had loved, about the books she had read and the world she had imagined before reality had taught her about hardship. He showed her how to ride, setting her on his gentlest mare and walking beside her until she gained confidence. Margaret and Samuel loved these riding lessons, and soon all 3 Langfords were competent enough to ride out with Garrett to see the extent of his property. These family outings, for that is what they felt like, became the highlight of Tessa's week. Manuel Garcia, Garrett's ranch hand, became a regular presence around the ranch and brought his wife Elena to meet Tessa. Elena was a warm-hearted woman who spoke limited English but had a ready smile and immediately took to the children. She began visiting regularly, and soon Tessa had a friend to help combat the isolation of ranch life. Through Elena, Tessa learned more about Garrett's standing in the community. He was respected, she discovered, known as an honest man who paid his debts and treated everyone fairly regardless of their background. He had helped Manuel's family through a hard winter, had loaned money to a neighbor whose well had gone dry, had stood up to some rough characters who had tried to drive a Mexican family off land they had owned for generations. "He is a good man, your Garrett," Alina said one afternoon while they were hanging laundry together, the children playing nearby. "After his wife died, we thought he would leave, go back east. But he stayed, and he has built something good here. He deserves happiness again." "He is not my Garrett," Tessa protested, but weakly. Alina gave her a knowing look. "He is someone's Garrett, I think. And the way he looks at you when you are not watching, the way you smile when he comes in for meals, everyone can see what is growing there. Is it wrong to feel this way so soon after losing John? Who says what is right or wrong in matters of the heart? You are alive, and your husband would want you to live, not just exist. My grandmother used to say that love is a gift, and when God gives a gift, only a fool refuses it." The words comforted Tessa, easing some of the guilt she still carried about moving on. John had been a good husband, but he was gone. She had mourned him and would always carry his memory, but that did not mean she had to remain frozen in grief forever. In October, they attended the church harvest social together, their first public appearance as something more than employer and employee. Tessa had sewn a new dress for the occasion, a deep green that brought out the highlights in her auburn hair. Margaret wore a pink dress Tessa had made, and Samuel had new trousers and a shirt that made him look suddenly older. Garrett appeared at the house in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed, looking nervous as a schoolboy. "You look beautiful," he said when Tessa emerged, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. The social was held in the churchyard, tables laden with food and lanterns strung between the trees. The entire community turned out for these events, and Tessa braced herself for the gossip and speculation their arrival together would generate. But Reverend Mitchell greeted them warmly, and Alina was there with Manuel, immediately drawing Tessa into conversation with a group of women. Some remained cool, including Mrs. Henderson, who sniffed and turned away, but others were kind. Widow Thompson, who had remarried after a respectable mourning period, went out of her way to welcome Tessa. Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry in town, offered her some mending work if she ever needed extra income. Garrett stayed close but not oppressively so, letting Tessa navigate the social waters while remaining available if she needed him. She watched him talk easily with the other ranchers and miners, saw how people respected him, noticed how he always made a point to greet the Mexican and Chinese families who sometimes faced prejudice from less enlightened members of the community. When the dancing started, Garrett appeared at her elbow. "May I have this dance, Miss Tessa?" It was the first time he had called her that, the playful formality making her smile. "You may, Mr. Garrett." He led her to the makeshift dance floor as the fiddler struck up a waltz. Garrett's hand was warm at her waist, his other hand engulfing hers, and he moved with surprising grace for such a large man. They swirled around the floor, and Tessa felt like she was floating. "People are watching," she murmured. "Let them watch. I am courting you properly now in public. If that is all right with you, more than all right." She met his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there, warmth and affection and the promise of something deeper. "Thank you for this, Garrett, for being patient, for doing this right. Thank you for giving me a chance, for bringing life back into my world." They danced 2 more dances before Tessa begged off, claiming she needed to check on the children. In truth, she was overwhelmed by the emotions swirling through her, by the reality of this new chapter of her life unfolding in front of the whole community. She found Margaret helping the younger children with games while Samuel was running around with a pack of boys his age. Her children were thriving here, she realized. They had color in their cheeks and meat on their bones. They laughed easily and often. They were secure in ways they had never been during the hand-to-mouth existence of their father's mining days or the uncertainty after his death. "Penny for your thoughts." Garrett had followed her, 2 cups of punch in his hands. He offered her one. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a few months. We went from homeless and desperate to this." She gestured at the scene before them. "Sometimes it feels like a dream, and I am afraid I will wake up back on the street with my children crying and nowhere to go. It is not a dream. You are here with me, and I am not letting you go anywhere." He said it simply, but the conviction in his voice was absolute. "I know we have been taking things slow, but Tessa, I need you to know my intentions are serious. I am not playing at this. When enough time has passed, when you are ready and people cannot say we rushed, I am going to ask you to marry me." Tessa's breath caught. "Garrett, you do not have to answer now. I am just telling you where my heart is leading. I love you, Tessa Langford. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you have made my house a home. I love how you mother your children with such fierce devotion. I love your laugh and your sharp wit and the way you hum while you sew. I love all of you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that love." Tears pricked at Tessa's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way again, did not think my heart had room for anyone after John. But you have shown me that the heart is not a vessel that empties. It is something that grows to accommodate new love without diminishing the old. I will always carry John's memory, but there is room for you too. So much room." He set down their punch cups and took both her hands in his. "Then we have an understanding, that we are working toward a future together." "Yes, we have an understanding." He smiled, and she saw joy transform his face. For just a moment, she thought he might kiss her right there in front of everyone, but he restrained himself, simply raising her hands to his lips instead. "Thank you," he said against her knuckles. "You have made me the happiest man in the territory." They returned to the party hand in hand, and if anyone had doubted the nature of their relationship before, they could not now. Tessa saw Mrs. Henderson's disapproving glare, but she also saw Reverend Mitchell's approving nod and Alina's delighted smile. More importantly, she saw her children's happy faces and felt Garrett's steady presence beside her. The winter that followed was the happiest Tessa had known since before John's death. The ranch work slowed with the cold weather, giving them more time together as a family. Garrett taught Samuel to care for the horses properly and even let him help with some of the easier chores. Margaret learned to gather eggs and tend the chickens, taking pride in her responsibilities. Garrett moved back into the house as the temperatures dropped, taking the small office room as his bedroom. It was barely big enough for a bed, but he insisted on the arrangement. "I am not spending the winter in the barn, but I will not compromise your reputation by sleeping just down the hall from you," he declared. The office room was on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms, with the main room and kitchen between, and he was satisfied that was proper enough. They celebrated Christmas together, Garrett surprising them all with a small fir tree he had hauled down from the mountains and presents he had clearly put thought into. A new doll for Margaret, carved wooden horses for Samuel, and for Tessa, a beautiful shawl he had ordered from back east, soft wool in a rich burgundy that must have cost dearly. "Garrett, this is too much," she protested, though she ran her hands over the soft fabric reverently. "Nothing is too much for you. Besides, I wanted to see you in something that was not black or gray. You are in mourning, I know, but it has been 9 months. I thought perhaps a little color would not be amiss." She had gifts for them too. Shirts she had sewn for Garrett with careful stitching and extra fabric in the shoulders to accommodate his size. She had also made him a quilted vest that would keep him warm during the cold morning chores. His face when he opened the package told her how much the gesture meant. That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the sofa in front of the fire, closer than propriety strictly allowed but still respectable. Tessa had draped the burgundy shawl around her shoulders, and Garrett had his arm along the back of the sofa behind her, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "This has been the best Christmas I have had in years," Garrett said quietly. "Having people to share it with, having a reason to celebrate. Thank you for that. Thank you for giving us a place to celebrate, for making us part of your life." Tessa leaned her head against his shoulder, a bold move but one she could not resist. He went still for a moment, then carefully put his arm around her, drawing her closer. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, neither wanting to break the peaceful intimacy of the moment. Finally, reluctantly, Tessa stirred. "I should go to bed." "I know." But he did not release her immediately. Instead, he turned her gently to face him, his hand cupping her cheek. "Tessa, may I kiss you? Just once. I have been wanting to for so long, and tonight has been so perfect, and I just need to know what your lips feel like against mine." Her heart was racing, but she nodded. "Yes." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to feel alive and desired and connected to another person. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, chaste and respectful, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with barely restrained desire. "You are remarkable," he breathed, "and I am the luckiest man alive." "I am pretty lucky myself," she managed, her voice shaky. "Good night, Garrett. Good night, my love." She went to bed that night touching her lips, reliving that perfect kiss, her heart full to bursting. She loved him. She was going to marry him. They were going to be a family, really and truly. The thought filled her with joy and just a touch of fear. What if something went wrong? What if she lost him like she had lost John? Could she survive that kind of loss again? But she pushed the fears away. Life offered no guarantees. All anyone could do was embrace happiness when it came and trust that love was worth the risk of pain. January brought bitter cold and occasional snow, unusual for southern Arizona but not unheard of. The ranch work became harder, ensuring the animals had water when troughs froze and providing extra feed when grazing was difficult. Garrett worked long hours, often coming in exhausted and wind-burned. Tessa did everything she could to make the house a haven, keeping the fire burning and hot meals ready. She heated water for him to wash and laid out clean clothes. She massaged his tired shoulders in the evenings while he told her about the day. These small acts of care deepened their bond, the relationship growing roots that went deeper than passion or romance. Manuel came by one particularly cold morning with concerning news. There had been reports of cattle rustling in the area, and several ranchers had lost stock. He suggested Garrett move the herd closer to the house where they could be watched more carefully. The next few weeks were tense. Garrett slept fully clothed, his rifle near at hand. He and Manuel took turns riding patrol at night. Tessa lay awake listening for trouble, praying that violence would not find them here. One night in early February, it did. Tessa woke to Rufus barking frantically and the sound of gunshots. She grabbed her robe and ran to the children's room, finding them already awake and frightened. "Stay here," she ordered. "Stay away from the windows." She ran to Garrett's room but found it empty. Heart pounding, she went to the window and saw figures moving in the darkness near the barn, saw the flash of gunfire. Without thinking, she grabbed John's old rifle from where Garrett kept it above the door, checked that it was loaded like her father had taught her years ago, and positioned herself at the window. She saw Garrett and Manuel pinned down behind a water trough. saw 3 or 4 men advancing on them. She threw open the window, letting in a blast of cold air, and fired twice into the air. The sharp cracks of the rifle made the attackers pause and turn. That moment of distraction was enough. Garrett and Manuel returned fire, and the rustlers broke, running for their horses and disappearing into the night. Tessa was shaking so hard she nearly dropped the rifle. She set it down carefully and ran outside, not caring about the cold or her bare feet. "Garrett, Garrett, are you all right?" He emerged from behind the trough, hatless and wild-eyed, and grabbed her by the shoulders. "What were you thinking? You could have been killed. You should have stayed in the house with the children. They were going to flank you. I could not just stand there and watch you die." She was crying now, the fear and adrenaline catching up with her. "I could not lose you. I could not." His anger melted, and he pulled her hard against his chest. "God, Tessa, you terrified me, but you probably saved our lives. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I have ever seen." He pulled back to look at her. "Where did you learn to shoot?" "My father taught me. He said a woman living in a city needed to know how to defend herself. I never thought I would actually have to use it." She was shivering now from cold and shock. Manuel appeared, looking shaken but unhurt. "They are gone. I will ride to town and get the sheriff, tell him what happened." "Thank you, Manuel. Be careful." Garrett kept one arm around Tessa as he spoke, as if afraid to let her go. After Manuel rode off, he swept Tessa up in his arms and carried her back into the house. "Your feet are bare and half frozen. What am I going to do with you?" "Love me," she suggested through chattering teeth. "Already doing that. Have been for months." He set her down in front of the fire and wrapped her in a quilt, then knelt to examine her feet. "No frostbite, thank God." "You are lucky." Margaret and Samuel crept out of their room, eyes huge. "Mama, Mr. Garrett, what happened?" "Some bad men tried to steal our cattle, but we chased them away. Everything is all right now." Garrett opened his arms, and both children ran to him. He gathered them close, one arm still around Tessa. "We are all safe. That is what matters." They sat together in a huddle until the fire warmed them and the shaking stopped. The sheriff came at dawn with a posse, took statements, and promised to hunt down the rustlers. He looked at Tessa with new respect when Garrett explained what she had done. "You are a brave woman, Mrs. Langford. Not many would have the presence of mind to do what you did." He tipped his hat to her before leaving with his men. After everyone left, Garrett and Tessa stood on the porch watching the sunrise. He had his arm around her waist, and she leaned into his warmth, both of them exhausted but wired from the night's events. "I almost lost you," Tessa said quietly. "If I had not woken up, if I had not heard in time." "But you did, and I am here and you are here, and we are both fine." He turned her to face him. "But this scared me, Tessa. Made me realize how fragile everything is, how quickly things can change. I do not want to wait anymore. I know it has not been a year yet since John died. I know some will say it is too soon, but I do not care. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time worrying about what other people think." "What are you saying?" "I am saying marry me. Marry me now, as soon as we can arrange it. Make this official, make us a real family. I love you and I love your children, and I want to spend whatever time we have together as your husband." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I do not care what anyone says either. You are right. Life is too short. I want to be your wife, want to build a life with you." He kissed her then, not the gentle, chaste kiss of Christmas, but a real kiss full of passion and promise and relief. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I need to do this properly," Garrett said. He went down on one knee right there on the porch, taking her hand. "Tessa Langford, you came into my life when I had given up on happiness. You brought light and love and laughter into my home. You showed me that my heart was not dead, just waiting for the right person to bring it back to life. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me be a father to your children? Will you build this life with me, whatever comes? Yes, Garrett Quinn, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier. He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. The children came running out, and Garrett told them the news. Samuel cheered and asked if he could call Garrett Papa now, which made Garrett's eyes go suspiciously bright. Margaret hugged them both and declared she was going to be the prettiest flower girl anyone had ever seen. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church. Tessa wore a dress of cream-colored wool that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs from Catherine's sewing box. Elena stood with her, and Manuel stood with Garrett. Margaret scattered wildflowers down the aisle while Samuel carried the rings on a small pillow Tessa had made. Some of the townspeople stayed away, disapproving of the quick remarriage, but most attended, filling the small church with well-wishers. Reverend Mitchell performed the ceremony with obvious approval, speaking about second chances and God's grace. When Garrett placed the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, Tessa felt the last pieces of her broken heart knit together. She had loved John and always would carry that love, but this was a new love, different but just as real. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and told Garrett he could kiss his bride, she went into his arms with absolute certainty that this was right. The kiss was tender and sweet, full of promise for the life ahead. When they broke apart, the whole church was applauding. Margaret and Samuel ran to them, and they left the church as a family, truly and completely. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with Elena and several other women helping Tessa prepare food. Long tables were set up in the yard, and neighbors who could not all fit in the church came to celebrate. There was music and dancing, and Tessa danced with her new husband as the stars came out overhead. "Happy," Garrett murmured as they swayed together. "Happier than I knew I could be again," she answered honestly. "Thank you for not giving up on me on us. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough cowboy who barely knew how to live like a civilized person." He smiled down at her. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this. I could never regret you." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Tessa felt nervous flutter in her stomach. This would be their wedding night, the first time they would be together as husband and wife in truth. She knew what was expected, had been married before, but this felt different somehow. This felt like a beginning in ways her first marriage had not. Garrett must have sensed her nervousness because he took her hand as they said goodbye to the last guests. "We do not have to rush anything tonight. I know this is all new and I want you to be comfortable." "I am comfortable with you, maybe a little nervous, but in a good way." She squeezed his hand. "You are my husband now, I want this." He kissed her softly. "Then come to bed with me, wife." They checked on the children first, finding both sound asleep in their room, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Tessa stood in the doorway looking at them, overcome with gratitude for how far they had come. From homeless and desperate to safe and loved, part of a real family again. Garrett came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on top of her head. "They are good children. You have done a wonderful job raising them. We are going to raise them together now. You are their father now in every way that matters. I will do my best by them, by all of you." He turned her to face him. "Ready?" She nodded, and hand in hand they walked to the main bedroom, their bedroom now. Garrett had cleaned it thoroughly and put fresh linens on the bed. There were flowers in a vase on the dresser, and he had somehow procured fancy candles that cast soft light around the room. "When did you do all this?" Tessa asked, touched by the effort. "Elena helped me earlier while you were getting ready. I wanted tonight to be special. It was special, more than Tessa could have hoped. Garrett was patient and tender, taking his time, making sure she was with him every step of the way. The physical intimacy was different than with John. Not better or worse, but uniquely theirs, building on the emotional intimacy they had developed over months of courtship. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Tessa's head on Garrett's chest, listening to his heartbeat. She felt complete in a way she had not since before John's death, maybe even more complete than she had then. She had found love again when she thought that part of her life was over, had found a partner who matched her in strength and determination. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Mrs. Quinn, now and always." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, beginning their married life with hope and love to light the way forward. The months that followed were busy and full. Tessa threw herself into ranching life, learning from Garrett and proving to be a quick study. She could ride as well as most men now, helped with the cattle when needed, and kept the ranch accounts with a neat hand that made finding information much easier than Garrett's haphazard system ever had. Samuel thrived under Garrett's patient tutelage, learning everything he could about horses and ranching. At 6 years old, he was still young, but he took his responsibilities seriously. Garrett was patient and kind, teaching without criticism, building the boy's confidence. Margaret helped her mother around the house and also began attending the small school that had opened in town. She was bright and eager to learn, and Tessa was determined her daughter would have the education she herself had received. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Garrett's horse breeding operation grew, and he developed a reputation for producing quality working horses. The cattle herd increased, and they were able to hire another hand to help Manuel, a young man named Timothy who was learning the ranching business. In June, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. The news was both joyful and frightening, especially given what had happened to Catherine. But the doctor in Tucson, whom Garrett insisted on consulting, said Tessa was healthy and there was no reason to think she would have the same complications. Garrett was protective to the point of being overbearing, trying to stop Tessa from doing any heavy work. She finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and if he did not stop hovering, she was going to lose her mind. "I am sorry," he said, looking sheepish. "I just keep thinking about Catherine, about how quickly things went wrong. I cannot lose you, Tessa. You and the children are everything to me. And you are everything to us. But you cannot protect me from everything, and wrapping me in cotton wool is not going to keep me safe. I need to be strong for this baby, and that means staying active and healthy, not sitting around like an invalid." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be fine. I feel it in my bones. This baby is going to be healthy and strong, and I am going to deliver safely, and you are going to be a father. Have faith." He did try, though the worry never completely left his eyes. As Tessa's pregnancy progressed and she remained healthy, he relaxed somewhat. They planned for the baby together, Garrett refinishing the cradle he had started for his first child and Tessa sewing tiny garments. Margaret and Samuel were excited about the prospect of a sibling. Margaret declared she would be the best big sister ever, while Samuel hoped for a brother to teach everything Garrett was teaching him. In February of 1884, during a cold night with wind howling outside, Tessa went into labor. Elena came to help, having delivered several of her own children, and assisted with many births in the Mexican community. Garrett paced the main room, wild-eyed and terrified, while the children slept unaware in their room. The labor was long but not difficult. As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Tessa delivered a healthy baby boy. His first cry was strong and lusty, and the sound of it made Garrett burst into the room despite Alina's protests. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right?" He looked around frantically until his eyes found Tessa, exhausted but smiling, holding a blanket-wrapped bundle. "We are both fine. Come meet your son." Tessa held out the baby, and Garrett approached slowly, reverently. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face, the perfect little fingers that wrapped instinctively around his thumb. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. God, Tessa, I was so scared." Tears were running down his weathered face. "I thought I was going to lose you. I told you we would be fine. Have a little faith in your wife." She leaned against him, bone-weary but happy. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but not settled on one. Garrett looked at his son for a long moment. "What about Daniel?" "It means God is my judge, and I feel like God has judged me worthy of this blessing, worthy of you and this family." "Daniel Quinn. I like it. Daniel John Quinn, after his father and the good man who came before." She wanted to honor John's memory, to make sure her children never forgot the father who had loved them first. "Daniel John Quinn," Garrett repeated, testing how it sounded. "Perfect." They introduced the baby to Margaret and Samuel, who were enchanted by their new brother. Samuel peered at him seriously and declared he would teach Daniel everything important, while Margaret wanted to hold him immediately. Over the following months, life settled into a new rhythm adjusted for the needs of an infant. Tessa marveled at Garrett's hands, so large and calloused from hard work, yet so gentle when holding his son. He would walk the floor at night when Daniel fussed, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the baby calmed. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and growing quickly. By summer, he was smiling and laughing, brightening every room he entered. Watching Garrett with him, seeing the love and wonder in her husband's eyes, Tessa felt her heart could hold no more happiness. The ranch continued to thrive. Word spread about the quality of Garrett's horses, and buyers came from as far as New Mexico Territory and California. They were able to expand the house, adding a proper bedroom for Margaret and improving various outbuildings. Life was not easy. Ranching never was, but it was good. On a warm evening in September, the whole family sat on the porch watching the sunset. Daniel was on Garrett's lap, gurgling happily. Samuel and Margaret were playing with the new litter of puppies Rufus's daughter had produced. Tessa sat in the rocking chair Garrett had made for her, sewing in the fading light. "I have been thinking," Garrett said casually. "We could use more room, maybe add on a couple more bedrooms to the house." Tessa looked up, catching the meaningful glint in his eye. "Are you planning on filling those rooms, Mr. Quinn?" "Well, Mrs. Quinn, I was hoping we might, if you are agreeable to the idea of expanding our family further." She set down her sewing and came to stand beside his chair, looking out over the ranch they had built together. "I think that sounds like a wonderful plan, though perhaps we could wait until Daniel is a bit older before adding another little one to the mix. No rush. We have all the time in the world." He reached up and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Thank you, Tessa, for saying yes that day in town, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me. Every day with you is a gift. The gift goes both ways. You saved us, gave us a home when we had nothing. You loved my children as your own. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left." She leaned down and kissed him softly. "I love you, Garrett Quinn. I love you too, Tessa Quinn." The years continued to pass in a blur of hard work and simple joys. True to their word, they added to their family. 2 years after Daniel came another son, Michael, and 2 years after that, a daughter they named Catherine, after Garrett's first wife. It felt right to honor her memory that way, to acknowledge that she had been part of Garrett's journey even if Tessa had never known her. Margaret grew into a beautiful and intelligent young woman, eventually becoming a teacher herself at the school in Watsonville. She married a young lawyer from Tucson when she was 20, and Garrett walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Samuel proved to have his stepfather's gift with horses and eventually took over the breeding operation, expanding it beyond what even Garrett had imagined. He married Alina's niece, bringing the two families even closer together. Daniel and Michael grew up knowing nothing but the security of the ranch and the love of parents who had fought hard for their happiness. Little Catherine, called Katie by everyone, was spoiled shamelessly by her older brothers but grew up kind and generous anyway, with a gift for healing that eventually led her to become a nurse. Tessa and Garrett grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their struggles, of course, drought years that tested their resilience, a barn fire that destroyed part of their operation, the usual disagreements and frustrations of any marriage, but through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, facing each challenge together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Garrett took Tessa back to Watsonville and to the spot where he had first approached her, desperate and homeless with her children at her side. The town had grown over the years, but the boarding house still stood, though under new management. "I think about that day often," Garrett said, holding her hand as they looked at the old building. "About how close I came to just riding past, minding my own business. About how different my life would be if I had not found the courage to speak to you. I think about it too. About how terrified I was, how desperate. And then you appeared like an answer to prayers I had been too proud to voice." She looked up at him, seeing the gray threading through his hair, the deeper lines around his eyes, but also seeing the same kind, strong man who had offered her hope when she had none. "You told me your house needed a woman's touch, but what you really needed was family. Someone to share the burden and the joy. And you needed someone to share your strength with, someone who could appreciate how remarkable you are." He pulled her close and they stood there together, two people who had found each other when both needed saving, who had built something lasting from the ashes of their grief. "You have any regrets?" Tessa asked. "Not a single one. You. Only that I did not find you sooner. But then, perhaps we were not ready for each other sooner. Perhaps we had to go through what we did to appreciate what we found. Wise woman." He kissed her forehead. "Come on, let me buy you dinner in town. We can stay at the hotel tonight, have an adventure like young people." She laughed. "We are not that old yet, Garrett Quinn. I can still keep up with you." "I know you can. You always could. That is one of the many things I love about you." They walked hand in hand down the main street of Watsonville, gray-haired and weathered but still very much in love, still partners, still building their life together one day at a time. Behind them lay years of hard work and joy, of children raised and a ranch built into something substantial. Ahead lay more years together, grandchildren to spoil, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Tessa thought back to that desperate woman standing on the street with all her worldly possessions in her arms and two frightened children at her side. She wished she could tell that woman not to be afraid, that help was coming in the form of a kind cowboy with a house that needed a woman's touch, that everything would work out better than she could possibly imagine. That love could bloom even in the desert, even from the ashes of loss, even when it seemed impossible. But that woman was gone, transformed by time and experience into the strong, confident woman she was now. And standing beside her was the man who had helped her find that strength, who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who had built a life with her that was richer and fuller than anything she had imagined in her youth. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away even after all these years, Tessa Quinn squeezed her husband's hand and smiled. They had taken a chance on each other when both had been broken and desperate, and from that chance had grown something beautiful and lasting. Their story was one of resilience and hope, of second chances and the courage to embrace them. It was a story of family built not just by blood, but by choice, of love that healed old wounds and created new possibilities. It was a story of the American West, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply by refusing to give up, by choosing kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, love over loneliness. And as they walked into the hotel for their anniversary celebration, still holding hands after 20 years of marriage, still finding joy in each other's company, it was clear that their story was far from over. There were more chapters to write, more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch together from the porch of the ranch they had built with their own hands and filled with their love. The ranch that had needed a woman's touch had gotten so much more than that. It had gotten a family, a purpose, and a future. And the seamstress who had been evicted with her children had found so much more than just shelter. She had found a home, a partner, and a love that would last the rest of her days. It was, Tessa thought as she snuggled into her husband's side that night in the hotel room, exactly the happy ending she had stopped believing in, handed to her by a cowboy who had been brave enough to offer help and kind enough to let friendship grow into love. They had built their happiness together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time, and it was, in every possible way, enough.